All right, listeners, buckle up, because today's deep dive is a heavy one. We're delving into the life and crimes of John Wayne Gacy. Yeah, the killer clown.
A man who truly lived a double life.
Exactly. And trying to understand that duality, how someone could be a respected member of the community while committing such horrific acts, well, that's what we're here to explore.
We're not here to sensationalize, but to try and understand the man behind the monster.
Right. And we're going to be drawing on two main sources for this deep dive. We've got Gacy's Wikipedia page, always a good starting point.
And a biography from biography.com.
So we're synthesizing, looking for the connections, the insights that might help us, well, understand how someone like Gacy could exist. And where better to start than the beginning, right? Gacy's childhood.
Let's just say it wasn't exactly a nurturing environment.
No, far from it. I mean, imagine growing up with an abusive, alcoholic father who just constantly belittled you.
And it wasn't just physical abuse, which is horrific enough, but the emotional abuse Gacy endured really paints a picture of his upbringing.
Right, like his father mocking his interest in politics.
Which is interesting because Gacy later said that he pursued politics partly to try and gain his father's approval.
It's heartbreaking. It speaks volumes about the lasting impact of a parent's actions, or in this case, inaction. But even beyond the abuse, Gacy's childhood was tough. He was a sickly kid, overweight, struggled to fit in.
He had a heart condition that his biography mentions prevented him from playing sports. You can only imagine the social isolation that comes with that at a young age.
Absolutely, and I think this is where we can start to see the roots of what psychologists call inadequacy compensation. This idea that Gacy might have been overcompensating for deep-seated feelings of powerlessness.
And that need to overcompensate, to prove his manhood, as it were, that could help explain the need for control, the domination over his victims.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? Like his desire for control, born out of this really dysfunctional, traumatic childhood, morphed into something dark and monstrous.
It's a disturbing connection. And unfortunately, the trauma doesn't end there. Both sources, the Wikipedia page and the biography, they both mention that Gacy was sexually abused as a child.
Another layer of this horrific cycle of abuse. He's a victim first, and as warped as it seems, you have to wonder if that played a role in shaping his own predatory behavior later on.
It's a difficult thing to grapple with, but you can't ignore these early traumas when you're trying to understand someone like Gacy. They don't excuse his actions, but they certainly provide some context. The need for control, the warped sense of masculinity, even this facade of normalcy that he presented to the world.
This mask he wore, and it's that mask that allowed him to operate undetected for so long, drawing his victims into this horrific web.
And that's what we're going to uncover as we dig deeper into Gacy's adult life. We'll see how he built a career, a family, all while harboring this dark secret. He wanted to be seen as successful, respected. Maybe it was that need for approval that his father never really gave him.
It's wild to think about. I mean, this is a guy who is known for entertaining at children's parties, for being friendly with neighbors, helpful.
Yeah.
And all the while.
Yeah. And it wasn't just a passing interest either. He was really active in his community, belonged to a Jolly Joker clown club, did charity events. The whole bit really makes you think, doesn't it, about appearances and all that.
For sure. And that desire for a normal life, it extended to his personal relationships, too. He was married twice, actually.
Yeah, first to Marlon Myers back in '64. And here's an interesting tidbit. Her father actually bought Gacy 3 KFC restaurants to manage out in Waterloo, Iowa. It kind of speaks to the level of trust Gacy was able to garner. They had 2 kids, but the marriage fell apart in '68 after Gacy was convicted of sodomy.
Hold on. So even before the murders, there were these red flags.
Yeah, like I said, cracks in the facade.
Yeah.
He did marry again, though, Carol Hoff, in '72, after he moved back to Chicago. Seemed like he was trying to build that normal life again.
But that's when the murder started, right? During that second marriage.
That's right. His first known murder was in 1972, shortly after he moved into that house on Somerdale Avenue, the one that would become infamous. The victim was a 16-year-old kid, Timothy McCoy, who Gacy picked up at the Greyhound station, lured him back with the promise of a place to stay, a meal.
And it's Gacy's own words about this first murder that really get me. He claimed self-defense, said McCoy attacked him with a knife.
Right, but even in his confession, there are these holes in his story. Like he says McCoy was making breakfast, and then suddenly he's in the doorway with a knife, doesn't quite add up. And then later, Gacy admitted to feeling this sexual thrill from the killing. That speaks volumes, you know.
It's like the act itself, the murder, opened up some kind of door in his mind, and he felt the need to walk through it. again and again. The Wikipedia page, it lists at least 33 victims, young men, boys, each one more horrific than the last.
And it wasn't random. He had a type, often teenagers. He'd lure them back to his place, sometimes promising work, other times using the clown persona to gain their trust. Just awful.
And the premeditation is what gets me. He would use restraints, torture his victims. There was even one instance where he made a young man, while he was still alive, dig trenches in the crawl space. Like he was already planning for what was to come.
That control, the planning, it all goes back to that deep need for control that we were talking about earlier. It's like he needed to control every aspect of his life, even these horrific acts.
And all the while, he's throwing these neighborhood parties, participating in community events. It just boggles the mind.
He was good at compartmentalizing, keeping that public persona separate from the monster he was in private. And that's honestly one of the most frightening things about this case.
Because if Gacy could blend in so seamlessly, who's to say it couldn't happen again? What if Robert Piest, his last victim, hadn't crossed paths with him?
It's a chilling thought. Piest, he was just 15, worked at a pharmacy. Disappeared after telling his mom he was meeting Gacy about a job. But his family, they refused to believe he'd just run away. They kept the pressure on the police, insisted they investigate Gacy.
And thank goodness they did. Their persistence, it's really incredible. They're the reason Gacy was finally caught.
Oh, absolutely. The police searched his house twice. The second time, they found that receipt, the one belonging to Piest, proving he'd been there. And then, one of the detectives, he noticed this smell coming from the heating duct. Said it smelled like, decomposition.
And that was it, wasn't it? The beginning of the end for Gacy. They got a warrant, started digging up the crawl space. And, well,
they found 26 bodies buried in there. 26. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. That's when the true horror of what Gacy had done really came to light.
But even then, even facing all that evidence, Gacy still tried to control the narrative, didn't he? I mean, can you imagine facing those charges, that mountain of evidence, and still trying to claim insanity?
Gacy was all about control, right? Manipulation. He'd built this entire persona, this image of himself as this upstanding guy. So when the truth comes out, he doesn't just come clean. No, he doubles down, tries to convince the doctors that he's got multiple personalities.
That's where Bad Jack comes in. Like, he was trying to create this distance between himself and the murders.
Yeah.
It wasn't me, it was this other guy.
Exactly. Bad Jack was this separate entity, he claimed. Hated homosexuals, thought the victims were, and I'm quoting here, scum. It's a classic case of trying to deflect responsibility. Didn't work, obviously, but it gives you a glimpse into his thought process.
The jury saw right through it. The evidence was just too overwhelming. 33 counts of murder. Sentenced to death.
Death row at Menard Correctional Center. It's hard to fathom what must have been going through his mind during those final years.
Well, from what I've read, he almost seemed to revel in the notoriety. Started painting often these really creepy clown images. Just bizarre. And people were buying this stuff.
Believe it or not, yeah, he actually sold quite a few paintings. Guess there's a market for everything, even art from a convicted serial killer.
It's morbid, really. Did he ever, express any remorse, any real attempt to explain his actions?
Despite all the interviews, all the chances to come clean, he never really did. His stories were always all over the place. One minute he's claiming innocence, the next he's blaming his employees, then it's some wild conspiracy theory, like he couldn't accept the truth, even when he was staring death in the face.
So even at the very end, it was all about manipulation, denial.
Pretty much. Even his last statement before the execution, he maintains his innocence. Says the victims' families won't find peace from his death, claims the state is murdering him.
Chilling, really. Shows how deep that darkness ran.
His last words, reportedly, were, "Kiss my Abba." Not exactly a man who found God. May 10th, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection.
Gacy's gone, but the impact of his crimes, that's still felt today. I mean, there are still unidentified victims buried in that crawl space. Families out there who may never know what happened to their loved ones.
And there's always that lingering question, could there be more? Some reports mention Gacy digging trenches in other places, so it's possible, even probable, that we'll never know the full extent of his crimes.
It's a terrifying thought. So where does that leave us? What can we possibly take away from something as dark and disturbing as the case of John Wayne Gacy?
I think it highlights how important it is to trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind a friendly smile, a good reputation.
It's a reminder that we can't always understand these things, these acts of pure evil.
Yeah.
Some things are just beyond comprehension.
Gacy was a master manipulator, a man who lived a double life. And his case serves as a chilling reminder that darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places.
And that's our deep dive into the life and crimes of John Wayne Gacy. We've covered a lot of ground today, from a troubled childhood to a horrific series of murders, and finally, to his manipulative last stand on death row. What are your thoughts, listeners? Could someone like Gacy exist today? In a world saturated with technology and true crime awareness, would he be caught sooner? Or are those vulnerabilities always there, just waiting for someone to exploit them? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Keep those questions in mind as you delve deeper into the world of true crime. And remember, sometimes the most unsettling truths are the ones we find closest to home.